Corruption. Defined by Google as a dishonest, fraudulent conduct by those in a position of power, is most common in human nature, has been like it has been since the beginning of mankind. Corruption is rampant amongst politicians, especially in developing countries, but common even in developed countries such as the United States. For example, Hillary Clinton, who is currently running. So, this begs the question during my independent study: what drives people to corruption? Personally, I believe the largest factor driving people towards corruption is greed. As one of the 7 deadly sins, it is common fact that greed is bad, though it is insatiable greed that leads to full-scale corruption. Many of the wealthiest people alive and in the past too have achieved their fortunes through corrupt and illicit practices. For example, Bernard Madoff, a former stockbroker and investment advisor, built his $823 million American fortune by committing the largest ever Ponzi scheme in the history of mankind, consisting of over 65 billion USD, costing investors over 65 billion USD. Fidel Castro, leader of the Republic of Cuba, built his fortune of $1 billion American through taking excessive pay as a leader of the country. Comparatively, Obama, the President of the United States, has a net worth of 12.2 million American, which is nothing in comparison with Fidel Castro's net worth. While the GDP of the United States is $18.1 trillion American, and the GDP per capita is $56,000 American, while Cuba has a GDP of 78.7 billion and a GDP per capita of 7,274. These figures are disproportionate to say the least, so it is quite clear that Castro essentially steals money from the people and actually blatantly goes against the principle of communism, which he had fought to achieve in the country. So Fidel Castro is a perfect example of corrupt politicians. Yet another example of corruption stemming from greed is the kiss of Judas, which we all know from the Bible stories, in which Judas identified which of the men that he was with was Jesus to the police force of the Sanhedrin, so they would arrest him for a measly 30 silver coins, though it is possible he was under the influence of Satan, according to the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Luke, though other than that it is believed that he did it on his own accord. Fraud is also what causes people to enter the 8th circle of hell, and there is a special segment of the 8th circle called the Apology of 5, dedicated solely to corrupt politicians. If even the Bible concludes that corruption is extremely bad, and about 31% of the global population is Christian and has historically been higher, why is it that corruption seems to be so prominent? Another part of corruption that I believe that another significant factor I believe that leads to corruption is desperation. A lot of these people who are corrupt business people, for example, China is rampant with them for one, come from not nice situations. They come from impoverished locations, as China has. Even now, China is actually quite poor, but before, China was atrociously poor, to say the least. Now, many of these people have built fortunes of millions and billions of dollars. So, desperation coupled with greed, I believe, turns out to be the largest factor in causing corruption. For example, in the story of the White Tiger, the ostensibly wealthy real estate developer, Mr. Shaw came from a very poor village in India when he first moved to Mumbai and built his massive fortune through illicit real estate practices, including bribery, harassment, intimidation, and even once, I believe, murder. So practices like this are common in the developing world, and this is because you can understand their situation, which they're extremely poor. They don't want to live in the situation they're in. So the evil within them, I suppose you could say, is awakened in their attempts to escape their horrendous situations. As for example, in the non-fiction book I chose to read, Busted as well, several people that are interviewed are drug dealers. Why is it that they were dealing drugs, doing illegal activities, and immoral as well? It's because they were desperate to raise their children properly. They were desperate to live a comfortable life. They lacked education because of the situation that they were born in. Drug dealing was all they'd ever known. Their parents had done the same. they couldn't get a proper education, so desperation and greed combined, because frankly, some of these drug dealers that were interviewed and busted were wealthy. There was one woman, the first woman interviewed, who was spending big money, to say the least, on buying designer clothing for her children when they lived in a horrible ghetto in Philadelphia, which the average house price, at least according to the book, was somewhere around $50,000 American. So there's greed right there, corrupt practices. This concludes my ISU.